Talk 49.
I'd like to call this short discussion A Life Behind Bars. My guest this morning knows all about prisons. He has a very, very big interest in prisons. Jan de Kock from Belgium. Welcome to Talk 49.
Thank you, Nigel.
Jan de Kock, you have an enormous interest in prisons. Tell us about this.
Well, it actually started more than 30 years ago. I was working in Chile in South America with street kids during the dictatorship of Pinochet. And at a certain moment, we had so many children and youngsters behind bars that I was asked to take the workshops that we had set up in the streets behind bars. And for me, that was the discovery of a complete new world. So ever since, I haven't stopped going into prisons.
You said discovering a complete new world. Tell us about this complete new world.
Well, I also had my ideas about prisons and about prisoners, and it wasn't exactly the place where I wanted to end up. But because of my duty and my commitment, I thought that I had to encourage these people behind bar and to show them how you can live your life far away from crimes. But the more I entered that prison, the more people I met, the more I knew that it's often a question of luck. I realized how lucky I had been to have been risen in a lovely family, to have got all these opportunities to study what I wanted to do, to go wherever I wanted to go. And here I find myself with people who had gone through tremendous challenges, and I think the main thing was that I discovered beautiful people. I've been in 210 prisons now, Nigel, and I still have to come across the first person who doesn't have anything of goodness inside. I was blown away by their creativity, their patience, the trust as well. They treated me with a gift of confidence, and every time when I left the prison, I found myself in front of a new gate, a new bar, the prejudice. And I thought, what can I do to add to another vision about prisoners? And that's how I ended up. I thought I have to become a prisoner myself, and I wanted to be locked up on a voluntary basis. And my first idea was to live 1 year in one prison. But since I met all these foreigners in the prison in Chile and later also in Belgium, they said that a prison in their home country, whether it was China or the Congo, that would still be very different from a prison in Chile or in Belgium. So I changed my plan, and for 1 year I traveled from prison to prison all over the globe. And yeah, again, my life was turned upside down.
Jan, how did you go about getting into all of these prisons? You can't just knock on the door and walk in. What did you do?
Right. It took me 3 years to prepare that adventure. I wrote to hundreds of embassies, and some replied saying, it's impossible. Our prisons are overcrowded. Or others said, well, we sent you to that particular ministry or to a particular prison. So I got some contacts through embassies, but the best way to get into prisons were my contacts with prisoners that I had made over the years. Once they were released from the prison in Chile or later in Belgium, I kept in touch with many of them who actually became friends. And so one returned to Singapore, and his sister happened to be a person who was in charge of a prisons organization. And so they organized my stay in a prison there. In Haiti, for instance, by accident, I'm the godfather of a child whose father is a prisons guard. And he organized my stay in a prison in Haiti. And the third way to get into prisons was, to do something that deserved to be locked up. Like, for instance, in China, despite all my contacts in China, no one could get me into a prison, and I really wanted to see a Chinese cell. So one day I decided to give flowers to the soldiers on the Tiananmen Square, and I have to admit that I attached a little card to every flower, which said in Chinese, peace and freedom. And as I went to the soldiers giving these flowers, well, all of a sudden I was arrested, and they took me to a Chinese prison.
How was it being arrested in China? How are you treated?
Badly. In China and in other prisons in Asia, the focus is on physical repression. They believe that when you tame the body, then you tame the mind as well. So yeah, I was beaten up, but I think that my luck was that they thought that a whole group of people would be protesting, which was quite common there. When something goes on the Tiananmen Square, then most of the times it's a group of people trying to do something. So it took them a while to find out that it was just that lonely, crazy guy, and by that time it was just a couple of days that I could experience at the prison's life in China, and then I was released. Yeah, but it wasn't that bad as what I experienced in Laos. In Laos, at that time, prisons guards couldn't be married people. So you only had those young guys, 18, 19 years, and they were only trained in martial arts. I didn't know in Laos you even can't approach a prison. And I had rent a bike, and I dropped my bike against the prison's wall, and that was enough to be not only to be arrested, but to be beaten up. And or what to say about prisons in Japan, where it was not allowed to talk. When you spoke in a Japanese prison, then you were taken for 4 weeks to an isolation cell. I've seen bad things in Asian prisons, Nigel.
Jan, what was the best prison you've ever visited?
Yeah, it's maybe difficult to say this is a good one, that's a bad one, that's the best, that's the worst. But of course, there are prisons that are doing better than others. By the way, I keep on inviting all of us to think about alternatives. We take it for granted that prisons is the only way to respond to answer crimes in this world, which actually hasn't been always like that in history, and there are cultures where still today where it's still not done to lock people up. But okay, if we talk about better prisons, then I would mention Scandinavian prisons. I had the privilege to spend a while in the Bastøy prison, which is on an island in Norway. And there you don't have bars anymore. We lived in little houses in small communities, 7, 8 inmates. And we were trained in social behavior. We made turns for the laundry, for the cooking. During the day, we worked in fishing, foresting. There was a big farm as well. And very interesting, every prison's guard was responsible for 3 or 4 inmates. Not only while on that island, while in the prison, but they were also called to do the follow-up. They made sure that every prisoner, ex-prisoner, would find a job, that they could join a church or a sports group. And I think it's enough to see the numbers. The rate of recidivism in Scandinavia is much lower than elsewhere in the world. And if you allow me, Nigel, I would also mention, you wouldn't expect it, but a small prison in Brazil that works with a particular method. And it would take us too long to talk only about the methodology. But where in most of the Brazilian prisons there is a recidivism rate of over 80%, in that particular prison, it's around 8. And it has all to do with responsibility. They give these prisoners even the keys of their cells. Spirituality is important as well, regardless from what you believe in, but there is time and space for meditation. Also work is important. The family is included. The visitors' day is one big happening. It's one day in the week, and it's beautiful. The children won't experience prison. There is a playground there. And interesting as well, most of the prisoners have a pet, a rabbit or a hamster to care of. And you notice that the fact that they care for animals make them quieter. And I experienced something very beautiful in our cell. We were 12, and one of my fellow inmates was Diego. And he told me that he was doing his 5th year. He had murdered a taxi driver. Now, every week he was visited by the family of the taxi driver. And I said, Diego, how come? And then he shared me this interesting story. He said, well, a few years ago, I heard that the widow of my victim was about to die. She was suffering from serious kidney disease. And in the whole province of Minas Gerais, they couldn't find a proper donor, because that would be the only way out, a kidney transplant. And Diego, he underwent some medical tests in the prison, and he was found compatible. Because of all the work that had been done in the prison about responsibility and also taking responsibility for your acts, he made that proposal. He said, if the family wants, I can give one of my kidneys. And that's what happened. So
it's very ironic. The guy who murdered this lady's husband actually saved her life, and that would not have happened if he hadn't have murdered her husband in the first place. It's a strange circle, a strange circle.
Those mysterious things in life, Nigel. And the story of Diego inspired me to pick up my backpack again. And 10 years after the world tour through prisons, I stayed at places in houses with victims who hadn't left the last word to the effect, to the crime, and to the hatred. I've come across wonderful people in Rwanda, in New York, widows who hadn't made a choice for the war on terror, but who want to raise their children with values of tolerance and even humor. I stayed with parents of youngsters who were killed in Norway by Anders Breivik, and it's amazing how some people carry on. I met in the United States Azim Kamisa, who actually he wrote the afterword of that last book where I collected all these victim stories, and his son was murdered while delivering pizzas. Now, Azim at the court, he met the grandfather of the shooter, who seemed to have been a young guy as well, who went through a lot of challenges and problems in his childhood. And it ended up that the grandfather took Azim Kamisa, the father of the victim, to the prison. In the beginning, Azim was not very keen on doing it, but as they met the young guy and as he promised to visit him again, it took him to the point where he is at now. Azim told me, I lost a son, but I've gained another one.
How incredible.
Yeah.
Jan, you mentioned a few minutes ago Without Walls. You said that I understood you as saying we don't need prisons in their present form everywhere. I believe you have something to do with an NGO called Without Walls. Tell us just a little bit about this.
Yeah. And again, ironically, where we defend alternatives for imprisonment, the first act and the reason of existence of Without Walls was to build a prison in the Congo. The organization was founded as a result of my stay of 1 month in the prison of Butembo in Kivu in the Congo. It was one of my biggest nightmares. When I arrived there, the prisoners told me that for 2 weeks they hadn't eaten anything at all. There was no water, there were no toilets, and they had an average of 2 deaths every week. So when I left that prison after a month, the director pleaded. He asked me, Jan, help us. If you can find $250,000, we build a more humane prison with running water and toilets. And here was I. Crazy guy being back in Belgium. Where do I find $250,000 to build a new prison in the Congo? But friends of me said, we support you. Let's start a little organization. So that's how Without Walls was born. And for 4 years, we run from one church to another school, university, talking about the terrible situations of prisoners in Congo. And after 4 years, we had enough to believe that this was gonna end up well. We put the first stone. We even went a team of 10 volunteers for a couple of months to the Congo. Amongst them was an ex-prisoner who said, now I want to add something good to the world. And another 2 years later, we witnessed the inauguration of that new, more humane prison in the Congo. And at that moment, we got new calls because people had heard about Without Walls. So our second project was in Bolivia, where they tried to get the young people out of the adult prison. And Without Walls built the library for that youth center and the 4 greenhouses where they could grow crops for their feed, their food. So one of the persons who founded Without Walls is Hilda. She called me at that time and she said, I think I'm ready, but I want you to join me. I want to visit the man who murdered my sister because I don't want to carry on with that hatred in my heart. We went to visit the guy 3 times, and as a kind of gratefulness, Hilde said, I want to help you out with that raising of funds for the prison in the Congo. And her presence in Without Walls helped us to combine the 2 groups of authors and victims. And apart from fundraising, we organize as well workshops in Belgium and elsewhere in what I mentioned before, for restorative justice, where it is not only the giving a chance for the prisoner, but also how can the victim be restored, and how can we all become better persons by meeting one another. So Nigel, we often organize meetings with victims, ex-prisoners and other people. We do cooking, we do walks, we organize yoga or a music workshop. And by doing all these ordinary things, we discover that we become better persons for one another.
Jan, it's a remarkable story. How did you feel walking into this prison that you'd raised all this money for when it became a reality? How did you feel walking into that prison?
Well, ambiguous, because on one hand, of course, you feel proud, although we're just instruments in this world. But of course, we were happy to see that we could help to reduce the debt in the prison. But what I mentioned before as well, the question that you have invested in building another prison, but we knew that in the Congo, it was a question of life and death. Now that we have a prison with running water, and actually also we can receive more land around, so they are now cultivating beans and manioc, and so that was the main issue. Now that that is running, we can start investing in restorative justice. Before you talk about dialogue between inmates and victims and their families, and before you talk about rising awareness, you have to make sure that the person can stay alive. So therefore we are, I'm grateful, but the challenge goes on.
One very last question, Jan. You became a criminal you put flowers, you gave flowers to the guards on Tiananmen Square, you parked your bike against a wall in Japan, a prison wall. Have you now decided to give up a life of crime and stop being a criminal?
Well, sometimes my family, after they have read the first book, now that they know what can happen in prisons, they are more concerned than I am, and they try to to stop me. But it's just like in the hospital, going into the prisons, or better say, meeting people behind bars makes me extremely happy, Nigel. And so I think it is just natural that in life we do the things that make us happy. So that's why I keep on going into prisons.
Jan, stay being happy, stay going into prisons. It looks as though you're doing a tremendous amount of good things. Without Walls, we can find that in Google, I would imagine.
Yeah, there is a website that should be translated. It's without walls .be, I think.
Belgium. BE.
Belgium, and if it's not BE, it is com.
Okay. Jan de Kock, thank you very much for telling us your very interesting story. And please come back again and talk to us another time too. Thank you very much. Thanks.
Thank you.
Talk 49.